Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Jim May, and with my colleague Aaron Daly, we are delighted to introduce to you a book called The Advanced Introduction to Human Dignity and Law. Aaron?
It's been recently published by Elgar, and it's designed to give you an overview of how law has incorporated the concept of human dignity. So we're going to give you a brief overview of what's in the book, and we'll walk through it a little bit chapter by chapter, just so you can have a sense of it.
So before we do, Aaron, why is dignity so important?
I'm so glad you asked, Jim. Dignity is important because it's important to people. People want to have human dignity, and they want their dignity to be respected, and they want to be treated like a person. They want to be treated like a person of worth, and they want to be treated like a person of equal worth, equal to everybody else. And the law has started to realize that after millennia of treating dignity as if it was something that only belonged to people of high rank or people of a certain economic status or certain kinds of distinction. After World War II, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the world started to recognize that every member of the human family, as the UDHR says, every member of the human family has equal dignity, and that notion of dignity is connected to rights, that people can walk into court and claim that their dignity has been violated, and courts increasingly around the world are listening to that claim.
Yeah, I think that's what makes dignity so interesting, is that it's not simply a value, it's also a right. People can go into court and claim that there's been a violation of their right to dignity. And do you think it started off as a legal concept beginning with the Universal Declaration, now in its 72nd anniversary in a few days or something, right? Did it start off as a legal idea, you think?
I think, well, dignity's been around and law's been around for a long time, but it's only been in the 20th century that they started to pay attention to each other. We saw a handful of constitutions in the early part of the 20th century that recognized dignity in various contexts. But after the UDHR affirmed the inherent universal dignity of every person, that's when law really started to pay attention both at the international and at the national level.
Yeah, and at the international level, it's the one thing that we can all agree about. You know, there's the twin covenants, one on civil and political rights and the other on socioeconomic and cultural rights, and they don't agree about anything virtually, and even the countries that sign on to them don't either. But the one thing they agree about is human dignity under law as a legal concept. And then we see it become a paramount feature of constitutionalism in the modern age. And I wouldn't mind if you'd say a few words about how that happened.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's the one thing that we agree on. It's also the one thing that unites all of humanity. People are different in so many different ways, from different cultures and different religions and different regions and different genders and different identities, and yet every person has human dignity, and that's the one thing that unites us all. And once international law started to recognize human dignity, it started to become a more prominent feature of constitutions. Constitutional texts recognize dignity as a value and as a right. More than 160 constitutions around the world, in every part of the world, from every tradition, every legal tradition. So, and often it's an enforceable right that courts are bound to enforce. And even where it isn't, many courts have treated it as a part of the right to life itself, the right to life is the right to live with dignity.
Yeah, so it starts off as a constitutional idea, as a notion, and is first embodied in the Constitution of Mexico in 1917. And then the next country to incorporate human dignity in its constitution was Ireland in 1937, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the UDHR comes along, and then there's this incredible phenomenon that happens all across the globe, where virtually every constitution that's adopted, including every one in the last couple of decades, guaranteeing a right to human dignity, now more than, as you say, 160 constitutions. And so we see courts paying attention to that. So these aren't just ruminations in a constitution. They're not just policy statements. They're in the Bill of Rights or the fundamental rights provisions of all these constitutions. And so there are these thousands upon thousands of cases that are making a difference in people's lives and that advocates can use to improve the human condition.
And they affect every part of human life, right? They affect the right to health. They affect the right to housing, the right to education, other socioeconomic rights like that. They also affect rights, civil and political rights, the right to free speech, the right to association, certainly the right to vote. Those are all considered dignity rights, as are rights to identity, who you marry, your name. There's cases about names. There's cases about all different aspects of how people present themselves to others, and also about how they feel. Cases prohibiting actions that stigmatize people, cases protecting against cruel and unusual or inhumane treatment, including the death penalty.
And also, you know, even though it's a concept that's almost as old as humankind, it has all these contemporary applications. The two that come to mind are COVID and climate change. So dignity rights are being used as a means to protect human rights in the time of the pandemic, but also sort of to provide for adjustments psychologically and otherwise to climate change. You know, dignity is when it comes to climate change, it is affected in all sorts of ways, right? By where you live, how you live, your access to fresh food, fresh water, to your own land, you know, to live a life in the way that you've been acculturated to do that. Are there other applications that come to mind that are contemporary as well that way?
Hundreds, pretty much every current legal problem, from abortion to, as we said, death penalty, and to protection of individual interests even after death. Those can all be understood in human dignity terms. Now, the right to dignity doesn't tell you who wins and who loses, but it does help us think about the answers. So when we think about abortion, for instance, if we think about it in human dignity terms, we might get to a better solution. So the book provides an overview of this intersection between the concept of dignity and the work that the law does, and tries to show through references to cases and constitutions around the world in different parts of the world dealing with all these different kinds of subjects. It tries to show how the law has accommodated and encompassed human dignity.
And it does so in a way that's super efficient and economical. Shall we turn to the contents of the book, Erin?
Sure. So it first provides, as you'll see from the slides, an overview of how dignity has been thought of as an idea first, and then sort of as a universal concept.
Okay, here we go. Go ahead, Erin, why don't you start us off?
So if you go to the next slide. So the preface that talks about dignity as an idea in different regions of the world, different sort of cultural and conceptual traditions, really, and how wherever you look, the way dignity is thought of, it really comes down to this notion of being treated as a person. And that means that everybody should be treated equally. Everybody is equal in dignity and rights, that people have a need to belong to a community. It's not just one's individual identity as if we lived on an island, but this notion of belonging. And also a notion that we see throughout history of the connection between dignity and rationality and dignity and conscience. So the first chapter just presents these broad themes, sort of developing the vocabulary of human dignity.
And the second chapter begins to take a deep dive into that, of sort of the origins, the emergence of the recognition of human dignity, beginning with the lessons of war and the UN Charter and the American Declaration. And those are the first places where we saw dignity recognized as a right in the international legal order. And then we see it sort of come into full blossom in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Which this chapter talks about. And then we turn to the impact of that in other facets of international law, like the twin covenants that we mentioned earlier on civil and political and economic, social, and cultural rights in the mid-1960s. And then during the modern era, constitutionalism all across the globe has been transformed by this idea that human beings have a right to dignity, not just dignity as a value, not just dignity as a norm, but that it has real legal salience.
The third chapter really connects dignity and law and starts to look at exactly what we mean, what we see when the law adopts the concept of human dignity. And the last 4 chapters look at how the law addresses human dignity in 4 different contexts. So first looking at this intrinsic notion of dignity as agency, worth, and identity. And we look at cases from around the world that recognize the dignity interest in being treated as a person, the dignity interest in having control over major decisions in one's life, the dignity interest in exercising reason and conscience, etc.
Yeah, and in these contexts, like reproduction, marriage, death, and a whole variety of things, which then leads into chapter 5, is the life of the mind, intellectual and emotional dignity, and the extent to which it can transform society through education and by protecting the right to hang out with people you want to hang out with, and other freedoms, and to be protected from humiliation and stigma in a whole variety of settings as well. So dignity under law is leading to improved outcomes in courtrooms all across the globe.
The next chapter looks at legal cases, again, all across the globe, that describe what it means to live with dignity, that describe what a government must do in order to ensure that its people live with dignity. So looking at the major elements of the material life, health, food, water, a healthy environment where we're seeing more and more cases, immigration issues, intellectual property, and so on.
So in these cases, Aaron, we see dignity coming in as an animating feature as well, with other rights that are recognized in constitutions. Is that right?
That's right.
And then we wrap it up with chapter 7 with something called participatory dignity. That is how dignity can make a difference in democracies, and in promoting the idea that everyone not only has worth that's equal, inherent, and universal, but they have a voice that they can use when it comes to governance.
And these cases reflect that exercising that voice, speaking, associating with others, and voting is not just a right that governments give, and not just needed for the sake of a democracy, but needed for the sake of protecting human dignity. So what we've tried to do in this book, particularly in the last 4 chapters, is look at dignity from the standpoint of human identity, of human expression, and the human experience. That people want to have autonomy. They want to be able to decide who they want to be. They want to be able to live with dignity. They want to be able to learn and educate themselves and develop their reason and conscience. And they want to be able to live in community with others and participate in decision making on a democratic basis.
So there you have it. Dignity under law can make a huge difference in all sorts of ways. And if you buy this book, you will have dignity in your hands as well. Aaron, any closing comments?
We'd love to hear your comments and your feedback. Any questions you have, we'd love to engage. So please feel free to email us at jrmay@widener.edu or at edaily@widener.edu. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching.